It's okay.
All right, great. Then, so after all those tech issues, it's now lovely to start this. So welcome, Rachel, and thank you for taking the time to speak with us at the Cove. I guess my first question is actually, what got you started on YouTube? So did you just suddenly wake up one day, had an idea for a video, or is it something you've been thinking about for quite a while?
This is okay. I've told this story a couple of times. It's a little bit embarrassing. I wanted to get better with makeup, and I was really, really bad at makeup. So I was like, you know what? I am gonna like record my progress doing my makeup, and then watch it back and kind of like analyze it and be like, oh, what did I do here? What can I do better? So I started making makeup videos, and I was kind of doing them for myself as well, and be like, oh, like these are makeup mistakes to avoid, and these are things like that. And then as I was making them for myself, some people started watching, and then I started talking about other stuff while I was doing my makeup. Like I think the first big thing that I did was I was speaking about like a local election or something like that, and people started watching, and I was like, oh, maybe people do actually care about what I have to say. And I had a blog at the time as well where I spoke about mostly because I worked in digital marketing back then, so I posted a lot of like business related stuff and photography related stuff and just kind of like opinions about things. So I basically shifted what I was writing about on my blog to doing it in videos while I was doing my makeup. People started watching, and after a while I kind of dropped the makeup and just started talking, and it went from there. It was
Yeah, jack of all
insane.
trades.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
had
it's
no idea people were ever going to watch, but I'm glad they did.
yeah. These things just take off.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. You do have an influential following, and I think a considerable portion of that has come from your poetry reviews and literature and book reviews.
Yeah.
So, how did you end up reviewing poetry in particular? Because I think that's kind of like, it's not your main thing, but it is, well, yeah, it's all very
It's
important.
one
But
of them,
that's
yeah.
yeah.
I've always loved poetry, like absolutely always. So I remember like when I was a kid, I used to have this little notebook that I carried around with me, and I remember it was blue and green, and I used to write poems in it. And I remember like there's one specific one that sticks in my mind that's like a limerick about a snail, and like he's trying to find a new shelf or a new house or something like that. But so I've always loved poetry, but I kind of fell out of love with it for a little while, kind of mostly at secondary school, and then I got this teacher in when I was doing my GCSEs, who just reignited my love of it, and I've adored it ever since. But it's a little bit of a nerdy thing, and I didn't really think many other people were interested in it, so I kind of kept quiet about it for a long time on my YouTube channel. And then it was one day when, I don't exactly want to speak about her, but Gabby Hanna, basically I saw she was getting into a lot of drama, and I used to be a bit of a fan of hers, and like I loved her like storytime videos. I thought she was very charismatic. I thought she was a great storyteller, and then I kind of think I just sort of grew out of her content a bit. But it was 2019 I think, and I saw her blowing up for all this drama, and I was like, okay, that aside, I wonder what she's been doing since I stopped watching her. So I googled her, saw she had a poetry book, was like really excited. I was like, God, I love poetry. Used to love Gabby. This should be great. Read it and was so disappointed, and was like, oh God, maybe I should make a video. And yeah.
There you go. Another thing we're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. So I never expected over 1 million people to watch a video about poetry. But I think it's quite encouraging that they did. It's nice. It's nice that poetry is kind of becoming cool again, and people are enjoying it. And what I tried to do with my video is like, yeah, the title sounds a little bit snarky and it sounds a little bit like drama, but you watch the content and it is educational. And I tried to like hook people in with like that emotional thing of like, oh, this poetry's bad, oh, this YouTuber did a bad thing, but then once they're in there, it's like, no, actually, you're going to learn something while you're here.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a nice balance between being informative and also you're not being hostile and, abusive. And so
I try not to.
No, I think you've succeeded. Well, that was, so speaking about, because I know you've reviewed like countless questionable poetry over the last few years, and particularly when it comes to like micro poetry, Instagram poetry, and the kind of lazier techniques. Does that concern you at all for like the future of poetry, or with how people are digesting it? Because people, I think there's a certain group of people that will gravitate towards that kind of poetry.
I think there are pros and cons of it like anything else. And what I will say is that not all micro poetry is bad at all. There are some absolutely fantastic pieces out there that just happen to be short, but the technique's there, the work's gone in, they have something to say, and I think that's brilliant. But when you get the kind of Instagram poetry and the stuff like Atticus, and that is just kind of lazy. On the one hand, it makes me sad because you see people giving all this attention and money and praise to someone who hasn't really earned it, whereas like you look at like little indie publishers and stuff and people who self-publish their poetry book and there's some amazing stuff out there, and it makes me sad that they don't get the recognition that they deserve. But at the same time, you have to see the positives and be like, okay, well, if this really like nice, aesthetic, simple, accessible poetry is grabbing people's attention and getting them into poetry in general, and they're using that as a jumping off point to go find more stuff and find good poets and learn about poetry and then go and find and support all the little indie poets and stuff, then, you know, that's a positive and you can't really complain about that. But it's hard. I don't think it's completely good or bad, but it does still frustrate me.
Oh, understandably, yeah. I definitely do feel the same way, and I think a lot of poets do.
Yeah.
You mentioned something really interesting that stuck with me, actually. I think it was during one of your reviews of Hannah's work, and you mentioned something about just because a poem is about something important, it doesn't automatically make it good. And I thought that's actually the perfect way to articulate it if you're ever discussing that sort of thing with someone, because you're right, you're allowed to enjoy shorter poetry, and you know, I know people that really like Ruby Core, and I feel very different, but when you see people talk about it and you know the fact that they do enjoy it and they're getting some sort of fulfillment out of it, I guess that's good. But whether or not it qualifies as good, talented poetry is another thing. But no, I get that.
It's hard because you don't ever want to like, what would the word be? You don't want to discourage someone from saying they enjoy poetry. You don't want to stop them from going and finding more, and you never want to invalidate their feelings. So if a piece of poetry has helped them work through something, especially if it's something like trauma or something difficult, then of course you want to be like, that is fantastic, that's so wonderful. You want to support that, you want to, you know, tell them how great that is, and you don't want to invalidate that. But at the same time, I think there's a difference between saying, hey, I enjoyed this thing, or hey, this thing helped me, and saying, hey, this thing is technically good from a technical perspective, you know? So it is hard. I think one of the comparisons I think I've made in my videos is like the Bridgerton books, because they're my guilty pleasure read. Not poetry, obviously, but like they're a bit of a guilty pleasure read, and I can like sit there and be like, yeah, I enjoyed them, I got really invested in the characters, I really liked this, but I can also be like, they are absolutely terribly written. Like they're really bad from a technical perspective, but you can still enjoy it, and I think it's important to make that distinction, isn't it, Kyra?
No, absolutely.
Sorry, she's
beautiful. No, you're all good. Oh, Kyra's a delight. I was hoping to see her tail walk past at some point.
If she jumps up on the settee, you might see it. I'm sorry, it's messy back there, but
would
you like to say hi, baby? Do you want to say hi? Shall I lift you up? Give me 1 second and she'll say hi. Ready? Ready? 1, 2. Oh, I know I got you. 3. Ah, there you go. You want to say hi? Say hello. Hello.
Loving that ball.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I know. I hear you. She tries to like talk to me by grumbling under her breath, but when a ball's in her mouth, it just sounds like this. Are you okay there? Yeah? Thank you. Okay, shall I put you down and you can go play? Yeah? Alright, ready?
Good girl. So patient.
Good girl. She's wonderful. I love her. Alright, sorry. Okay.
Dogs are an absolute. So yeah, I guess that makes me wonder then, what do you want to see more in mainstream poetry, like from this point on?
Oh,
God. What do you want to see?
That's a big question. I really like how one of the great things about poetry, I think, is that it's absolutely always been quite diverse, and it's given a voice to those who have previously been voiceless. like, just look at all the incredible black poets who were writing during the civil rights movement and some of the amazing work they put out. They've always had a voice in that respect. And what I'm seeing at the minute is there's like far more like LGBT poets basically who are getting a lot more recognition. And I think that's, sorry baby, I think that's amazing. So I was performing at Glastonbury this year, and I got to perform some of my poetry, and it was incredible. And it was just the smaller stages. But that aside, my highlight of Glastonbury was seeing Kay Tempest perform on the other stage, and it was just absolutely magical. And there's something about that, seeing like a non-binary spoken word poet on one of the main stages at Glastonbury was just unbelievable and inspiring. And I was in the crowd, I was like second row, and I was loving it, and I had a little cry, and I was like, oh my god, I was really emotional. But it was just the most amazing thing ever. And that's kind of one of the things I want to see more of. I want to see more queer and trans poets like becoming mainstream and being given a voice and stuff like that. So one of my favourite collections at the minute is, give me 1 second, this one, which I'm currently reading, which is like 100 queer poems, and it's amazing. It's one of the first like anthologies that's been released in a really long time, that's written by all poets who are part of the LGBT community, and it's wonderful. And I think we need more things like that, more voices like this being upheld and promoted and being made mainstream. And I think we're on the way there. I just want to see more of it,
Well, definitely. No, that's, 100%, because I think a lot of the time when it comes to, queer identity and talking about issues like that, I think the more that we hear those voices, the more complex what they talk about will become.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. There is going to be things that no one else has ever considered. Like, I'm a straight woman. So it'll be interesting to see, the more that we hear from the queer community, the more there is to discover, and even just a little intricate thoughts. So I agree with that. That's really true. Yeah.
The great thing about poetry is there's so much room for nuance, and I think by expressing your opinions and your views and your experiences through poetry, this is going to sound silly, but I think it really humanizes people. I think a lot of people who are homophobic or transphobic or just, really intolerant in that respect, they don't see the people that they oppose as human. And I think through art and poetry and writing and just creative experiences in general, I think, it's something that we can all connect with, and we can all start to understand and kind of really put ourselves in someone else's shoes. And so I think it's a really, really good thing.
Yeah. Empathy is something that we learn as well. So you're right. Art tends to tends to pave the way for modernity as well, and progression, and education. So can't disagree with any of that. So, you did mention that you performed some of your own poetry at Glastonbury. So how did that all go? I bet it was nerve-wracking but exciting.
It was terrifying and wonderful and magical and just overwhelming. So I did, I performed during two different sets. So I was part of a collective called Herd Collective, which is all about supporting and promoting women in music. So not just on the performing side, but also on the producing side and promotions and basically everyone who's overlooked in music. It's about giving them a voice, and they've recorded a single in the past at Abbey Road. And they used all female musicians, all female sound engineers, everything. It was brilliant. And so I performed as part of this all women collective. And the poem I performed was called Room, and it's basically about my choice to remain child-free and all the stigma around that and all the issues I kind of face. But kind of on a wider scale, it's about reproductive rights for women and people with uteruses, and how we're often stifled, especially by men making laws about us without us having a say. And I think it came at completely the right time as well, because that's a poem I've been working on for months now, probably 6-7 months, something like that. And it's been written and rewritten so many times, and I finally got it to a point where I was like, yes, this is ready to perform, I'm proud of this, I like this. And the day I performed it was the day before Roe v. Wade was overturned in America. And we performed it midnight on the Toad Hall stage, and then just a couple of hours later that was announced, and everyone was so emotional. But it felt like it was the right time to speak up about that stuff, and I feel like people kind of appreciated it a little bit more, and it was magical. Like, I had like women coming up to me afterwards and being like, oh, I'm so happy you said that, oh, I loved that, it's so important. And I just it was incredible. I had a bit of a cry afterwards. So we headlined the Toad Hall stage, which is just a tiny one, but there were a few hundred people in that room, and it was absolutely packed. And I came off stage afterwards, and I just sat down and I just had a cry, and I was like, I can't believe I did that. It was just a dream come true.
Yeah, absolutely. That is probably the best outcome you could get for something like that, and have people come up to you and tell you how moved they were by, you know, something that you've taken so long to write and read. Yeah. That's incredible. Yeah.
I was terrified as well, because I got up on that stage and I looked around, especially at the Toad Hall, and I looked around, just men everywhere, so many men, and I was like, God, do you know how scary it is to get up and talk about your uterus to a room full of like 200 cis men?
Yeah.
But they were really, really lovely and really supportive, and just they were attentive listeners, and they were really nice afterwards, and it was just wonderful. Really,
yeah,
really good.
Couldn't ask for anything more. That's awesome. So now that you have been writing poetry for quite some time, how would you describe your style? Like, are there any poetic devices that you find yourself gravitating towards, or anything unique about, you know, or, you know, original about your poetry?
That's a big question. I think I'm definitely still finding my voice. I'm still figuring that out. So I kind of go through stages. So at the minute I'm playing around with like more experimental forms and stuff, and I'm playing around with like one about like reproductive rights and abortion again, actually. It's a theme at the minute, but where like it's almost like a choose your own adventure, but in poetry. So the poem kind of branches out, and you can go down different routes and read it in different ways. And so it's a really weird experimental structure. So I'm playing around with different things like that at the minute, and just trying to have a little bit of fun. But when it comes to like my usual writing and the kind of, you know, more traditional forms and stuff, I'm a big fan of an extended metaphor. Like, I absolutely love it. So like, room's a good example of that, because I use the metaphor of it being like a spare room in my house, and everyone wants to control it, but really it's talking about my uterus, you know. So I'm a big fan of that. I've got another one that I call Misery Symphony, that's about basically I dated a musician who didn't treat me very well, but he used a lot of what I'd been through in the past as inspiration for his songs. And I was like, don't know how I feel about that. I was like, well, if he can use me for songs, I'll use him for a poem. And the whole poem is like full of metaphors of him basically ripping apart my body parts to make musical instruments out of them and create like an orchestra on stage. It sounds disgusting. It's very, very graphic. It's quite emotional, but extended metaphors, I'm a big fan.
Yeah. Oh, likewise. No, I can say the same. It's interesting that someone else telling your narrative, there's something quite disturbing about that, especially if it is someone who's been so harmful.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it is something that we can completely empathise with. But yeah, no, hopefully it's, you know, you're dealing with that in a healthy way, and it can be pretty tough. Yeah.
It's hard. I am finding that poetry is helping me deal with a hell of a lot of stuff. Like, I think it's kind of public knowledge at this point that I was in a really abusive relationship, and it wasn't good, and it really messed me up. I had major trust issues afterwards, and he hurt me physically and emotionally and in every way possible. And I found that writing about that afterwards really helped me process what I went through. And they're poems that I'm probably never going to show anyone else. They were just for me. And then some of them have become poems that I'm more happy sharing. But on the whole, most of them were just for me. But they helped me, writing it helped me process what I went through. It helped me kind of try and understand his side a little bit better and what he must have been thinking. Because, you know, it's easy for us to sit here and think, well, oh, you know, how can a man kick his girlfriend? Why would he do that? And we don't necessarily understand it. But I wanted to understand it, and I wanted to try and get where he was coming from, even if I didn't agree with it. And so kind of writing I guess, helped me process that a little bit and helped me come to terms with it. And, you know, that and a lot of therapy.
Yeah,
A lot of
absolutely.
therapy.
Yeah.
But,
No, that's yeah, no, sorry to hear about that, but yeah, it can be therapeutic, and this is probably me. I won't go into it too much, but I was in a very similar situation to yourself. So
okay.
that video you released it came out at the right time. And yeah, there is a particular kind of, especially when it comes to narcissism, there's a very set personality type. And, you know, unfortunately, if you encounter one, you can see it in, you know, when it comes to other partners. And yeah, so it is a heavy subject, but to talk about. But it's great to see that you've come quite far, and you know, I hope you can kind of see that. Yeah, we all are. No, yeah.
I'm sorry you went
So
through that though.
yeah, it's something I think a lot of women kind of deal with, and men as well. But yeah,
it's so much more common than you think. Because now I've been speaking about it publicly, the amount of people who've come to me, and people who I would never expect, and they've been like, you know, like people I know, they've been like, yeah, I was in the same situation, I went through that, or that situation you described is exactly what happened to me. Even one of my abuser's exes, like, came to me and said, I had the exact same experience with him. He did that to me. And it was like, the same patterns repeating, and whether, like, you're hearing about it about the same person or a different person, it's terrifying, but also as survivors you kind of feel a sense of solidarity and community, and like you've all got each other's back, which is really comforting, and I needed that so much.
Absolutely. It's the irony of feeling alone but going through that together. Yeah. It is healing, and then eventually you start to feel that. All right, so I guess I love all the questions that we've covered so far. I mean, the discussions we've had, it's mostly you. So I would say, would you have any advice for anyone who wanted, you know, veteran poets and new poets? Anything about getting used to, or, you know, getting their artwork out there into the world? You know?
Oh God, that's tough, isn't it? I know it sounds silly, but I was literally having this conversation with a friend yesterday who's a musician, and we were talking about the difference between, like, creating art for art's sake and creating art for business, and how there's very different approaches you need to take. And I think it's absolutely fine to write for yourself, create art for yourself, create poetry for yourself, all that stuff, that's absolutely fine. And you don't necessarily need to create with an audience in mind. You don't necessarily need to write thinking, I'm going to sell this, I'm going to promote this, I'm going to do whatever. You don't need to write with that mindset. But I think once you have decided, I want to share this with the world, or I want people to read this, or I want people to hear this, or whatever, I do think you need a little bit of a shift in perspective, if that makes sense. And you do need to be a little more business minded, and take some basic marketing courses, learn a little bit of the basics of digital marketing, and also don't be afraid to distance yourself from your poetry a bit, because, you know, when you first start putting it out there, you're going to get rejections. You're going to get a lot of rejections. And so this is going to sound really silly, but when I first started submitting my poetry to, like, journals and magazines and stuff, I was like, I know I'm going to get a lot of rejections, so I'm going to get myself used to it and get it out the way straight away. And I submitted some of my poems to basically, like, the biggest and best journal in the UK, and I was like, I know this is going to be a no, but I need to hear that, and I need to, like, get used to it. And I did, and I was like, actually, this is fine. I can cope with this. And then from then on, now I'm starting to submit to, like, smaller magazines and journals, and a lot of them don't have open submissions at the minute, so I've got, like, I've got a spreadsheet, and like, you know, when submissions are open and when I can do that, and which ones are going to go where, and which ones allow, you know, you to publish before or not, or things like all these rules and stuff. There's so much you have to figure out like that. So because some journals and magazines don't want you to submit poems that you've submitted elsewhere at the same time. Some only want things that haven't been published anywhere else, including blogs and Instagram, so you need to be aware of that. Some are okay with that. Some only want, like, text-only poems. Some are looking for things like poems and illustrations, or, you know, videos of poetry and stuff like that. So basically, do your research, figure it all out, get organised, and then don't be afraid of rejection.
You know? No, that's solid advice. Yeah, couldn't have said it better myself. All right. I actually think that concludes the interview. But I didn't know what to expect. It's the first time I've interviewed, so
Oh,
it's been
you
such
did
a
amazing.
Oh, thank you. Oh, and likewise, it's always fascinating listening to you talk, and I think that's why I've got 200 plus 100,000 followers. So
Thank you.
no, you've got a very important voice, and very loved and loving what you're doing. Just power to you.
Oh, thank you so much.